Hey, what's up, friends? It's me, Vindy, everyone's favorite rat. I'm here with a video. It's a review, a manga review, I guess. I think it's a review. I don't really know what I'm going to call it. I'm pretty sure it's a review, though. You know, like a manga review of Kimetsu no Yaiba, right? So, or Demon Slayer, right? I'll probably use the two interchangeably. Like, I personally have called it Kimetsu no Yaiba since I've been reading it before it was localized and had, like, its localized title of Demon Slayer. But I know that it's known now as Demon Slayer from the manga and the anime. So I'll probably use the two interchangeably just to get that out of the way really quickly as like a quick disclaimer. Yeah, so Kimetsu no Yaiba Demon Slayer, which is, you know, the manga sales phenomenon in Japan, right? Like in this shit's selling so insanely well. It's mind-boggling, but whatever. So it just ended a couple weeks ago, and I thought I'd do a review talking about it. To give my quick backstory of the series, I've been current since it was at the train arc, I'm pretty sure, is when I got caught up originally. So within, like, I think the first 50 chapters or so, I got caught up really quickly, and then I've been current since. And then I decided, as, like, the days were leading up to the final chapter, I decided to reread the entire manga because I wanted to see the final chapter with, like, the full series in mind. And then the final chapter would come in as if I had just binged the series, right? If I read the entire series the 2-3 days before I read the final chapter, then it would work out like that. So, that's what I did. So, not only have I been current on the manga, and I have the experience of reading it weekly from chapter 50, but I also binged the entire series recently, so it's all very fresh in my mind. So I have kind of both perspectives to talk about, which I think is important because I think that as we get into it, I'll definitely mention a lot that I think Kimetsu is a manga that, due to certain flaws with the writing and certain things, I think has a very different feel between weekly reading and binging, and I think that a lot of that feel comes down to Godoge's personal issues as a writer. But before I get into that, I guess I should just talk, you know, kind of very generally before I get into more spoiler things. I think Kimetsu is good, but I think it has some very glaring issues when you really start to look into it. And I don't blame people who had really, really big issues, especially with the final arc, because I think that the manga has this continuous issue throughout its run of not explaining things properly, and so I think that causes big issues where not necessarily people don't pick up on it, because I think it's like, it's hard to pick up on something that's not explained to you well, right? Like, it's not necessarily the fault of the readers in this case, because I think there were a lot of readers, and I think that weekly reading does contribute, because if something is put very small, and then you go to look at it, it's there. So I think that there were issues with the manga that are better if you binge it all, knowing what to look out for. You can pick up on a lot of it way easier. And I'm sure a lot of the people who had issues with weekly reading, if they go back and binge and pay attention and really, like, zero in on a lot of smaller things, will notice all the shit that everyone, including myself, missed our first time through. If you want to see, by the way, how I was feeling with some of the final chapters leading up to it, I do chapter reviews on my channel of the entire weekly Shonen Jump magazine. So you can go look at those chapter reviews. You know, I have timestamps. You can go to the Kimetsu section and see, oh, this is what Vindy thought about Kimetsu. Oh, this is what Vindy thought about, you know, chapter whatever, 201, or for example, right? And you can go click on it and you can see what I thought. So that's kind of a good way to judge how I was feeling about it weekly reading. But I think I'm mostly going to talk about the experience of binging it, because I think that was where I really started to kind of fully recognize what Kimetsu's big strengths and big flaws were as a manga. Before we really talk about some of the strengths, because I think I'll get to those later, I've already alluded to it a couple times, I want to start with what I would consider Godoge's main issue as a writer to be, which I've already kind of touched on, but I think Godoge's biggest issue, right, Koyoharu Godoge is the author, the mangaka for Kimetsu no Yaiba. And I think that their biggest issue as a mangaka and as a story creator is that they have a lot of trouble sometimes when it comes to accurately like portraying what they think and what they know about their world to the audience. So for example, I think the best example I can give is in the Infinity Train. There's a scene where Inosuke, Zenitsu, Tanjiro, and the Fire Pillar, the Flame Pillar, are all asleep, right? And we see how Tanjiro wakes up, and it makes sense within his character. We see him wake up. We don't see anyone else wake up. All of a sudden, Inosuke jumps up from the train and is just standing there. And I remember, if you're reading it, you know, you think, how is he awake, right? Because, like, the last you saw, he was asleep. And so I guess you just kind of have to assume that he did what, you know, Tanjiro did. but it's explained in a volume doodle, right? So in volume versions of the manga, right, there's like little doodles in between the chapters. If you read it all in the Viz Shonen Jump Vault, a lot of them are the volume scans, so they have the volume doodles at the end of the chapters. In the volume doodle, it wasn't in the Weekly Shonen Jump magazine, it was stated that the reason that they got away, that they woke up, is because Nezuko burned their train ticket, and that Gotoge just didn't have the ability to fit that into the actual manga. And I think that, like, while that's maybe not the biggest example of it, I think it's a very easy example to explain that shows a lot of the bigger issues, right? Because that's something that I would say is pretty important to the actual story being told, that you should put in there, right? And I think that the fact that Gotoge just didn't put it in at all is kind of an issue, you know? Because I think that you need to be making things clear for the readers, and expecting them to read the volume versions or put two and two together. You know, you can expect your readers to put two and two together. I'm not saying they have to explain everything. But I do think that there's a certain level of just not putting everything there clearly enough to where the reader actually has to really deep dive into it. And while that's not necessarily like an issue in all cases, I think that specifically with the way Gotoge does it a lot of times, I think that it's not subtle for the purpose of being subtle or subtle intentionally. I think it's that there just isn't a good enough job being done explaining these things to the audience, right? Another example is there's the 13 forms, right? And so, you know, as you're reading the manga, Tanjiro, especially in the final fight, is talking about these 13 forms. And I was talking about the 13 forms too when I was reading through it, because I remember like, okay, well, what are the 13 forms? What is going on, right? What's being explained here? Like, I didn't know if it was like an actual form. All we really get about it is that it's explained that Tanjiro thinks that if he does all 12 forms together, he'll achieve the 13th. But when you're actually paying more attention and you look at it, like, the way the 13th form is first done is when the guy who created the breaths and the dance of the fire god, like breathing and techniques, he saw that Muzan had 12 organs. And so that was when he first learned about the 13th form. And you know, it's kind of like, it doesn't even explain there, right? That like, oh, there's 12 organs, and then later, like, oh, there's, you know, you have to defeat all the organs. It's like, it just says he has like, whatever, like, I think it's 5, it says he has like 5 hearts and 7 brains, or 5 brains and 7 hearts or something, right? And then it says later, maybe I have to defeat all of those, but like, it's never put together, I think. And the problem is, it's like, the first part is said before, before you knew that there was a 13th form. It explains that Muzan has all the organs, and that's the first time that the guy used he finally, it doesn't even say he used the 13th form, right? It says that was when the dance was finally completed or whatever. And then it goes to Tanjiro, and he's like, oh, maybe I have to destroy all the organs. So the 13th form is clearly, you know, destroying all the organs at one time, using all your abilities together. But I think that the manga does have a clear issue where it's not explaining what it wants you to know well enough to where you can accurately, like, figure out what it's trying to tell you to do, or what the manga's trying to explain to you. And so I think that that's, like, the biggest issue with the manga throughout. And I think that it's why people reading weekly definitely had a lot more issues than someone who binges it later. Because I think that when you're reading weekly, you won't remember a tiny panel like this big of text, right? Like, you won't remember this panel of text telling you, like, super key information that's only told that one time in that one small panel, right? And that's why I think a lot of times you'll see a lot of these weekly manga kind of reiterate things and let you know multiple times what's going on. Because there's different levels, I think, of importance in exposition, right? There's exposition that is more important than others, and there's exposition that's less important, right? For example, Inosuke's backstory. Not the backstory that pertains to the fight in the final arc, but I think, like, you know, the little panels where he's like a baby pig and he's got his diaper and a pig mask on, right? That's probably less important than what the 13 forms are. So it's okay that it's locked in the, you know, the chapter volumes. But I think for, like, the actual important, you know, text that matters, I do think that, like, it is a flaw of the manga to not really be accurately showing everything to you. But I think that, like, again, like, the clear issue is just that it's not telling you enough or clear enough what is the thing that a reader needs to remember and what do they not. And I think that, like, the problem that causes is you know, you can't remember everything, right? Say someone is only reading 5 manga a week, right? They read 100 pages of manga a week. Even at that point, you can't remember everything, especially if you're reading goddamn One Piece, which has like 200 things going on, you know? Like, you can't actually remember every little thing going on, right? You kind of can, but I think it's a lot harder. For most people who read manga weekly, you know, I'm not going to be taking notes on everything that happens in Kimetsu and cross-referencing my notes later on. So yeah, of course, I'm going to forget this small panel of text that is actually hugely important. And I don't think it's the fault of the readers. I think that it's Gotoge isn't making things clear enough to the audience that, hey, this is important information you should be remembering, this information not so much. And I think that, like, that is the biggest problem that people have with Kimetsu stems from that. And I think a lot of the issues stem from that. It's just this not clearly explaining. I think it almost comes down to, I don't want to say what's going on in Gotoge's head, right? That's a little presumptuous, but I think that, like, you could say that, like, it might be that, you know, they have this very clear story in their head that they want to tell, and they're not, like, they just assume that everyone knows what they know about it, or maybe not assumes that everyone knows what they know, but that, you know, as you're writing, you think that maybe things are obvious because you're not the reader, right? You're not writing from a reader's perspective. You're writing from your perspective as a writer and as the person who created the world. So things might be more obvious, less obvious. And I think that this is something that, you know, happens all the time with issues, right? Like, there are some things that are too wordy and give too much detail, right? Like, you know, that's a problem people have with the Lord of the Rings books. Or, you know, I think sometimes One Piece can get, especially at the beginning of arcs, can get so bogged down with the exposition of that specific place because there's so much going on and so much that will all kind of pan out throughout the course of an arc that it gives you so much exposition at the start that you get bogged down. And I think that, like, I guess the best way to describe it is that, like, Kimetsu almost just doesn't have enough exposition, right? It's, you know, I think it's a great example of why, like, there is good and bad exposition, right? You can have fucking phenomenal exposition, and then you have Kimetsu where the exposition isn't really doing it, and there's not enough of it, and I think it's not clear enough, and so there are people who just don't understand, and I'm not saying it's their fault, right? I didn't understand it the first time I read it when I was reading it weekly. I didn't know what was going on, you know? I was confused about what's the 13th form, why is Muzan turning into a big fucking baby, you know? Like, what's actually happening? And I think that it was only through rereading it when I had, like, all these, because when I was rereading it, you know, I had all these questions in my head, right? I was like, okay, so what's, you know, the 13th form? What's going on here? What's going on here? And as I was reading, I was paying attention to any time those things were being mentioned, and so I was able to kind of construct a clearer image of the manga, you know? And I think that that's kind of Kimetsu's, I think that's what's interesting about it, because I think that that's actually, and here's something I will say, I think that an anime, or the anime for Kimetsu no Yaiba, especially once we get to the Infinity Train and beyond, could legitimately fix the problems of the manga if they, you know, if they recognize the issues and they decide to go forward and try to do them better, right? For example, let's go back to this Nezuko example, right? Where she burned the tickets of everyone in the Infinity Train. That's how they got out. Imagine if you have a scene of that in the anime, right? It doesn't have to be long. It could just be 15, 20 seconds, or you know, maybe a minute, right? Of Nezuko going, burning their tickets, and that's how they wake up. You can show that, and now you've done something the manga didn't that helps push the story forwards and helps, like, explain things and makes things more clear. And so I think that that's, like, just one example, right? Another example is, like, if you add maybe more lines of dialogue, or, you know, maybe really good flashbacks that tie everything together about the 13th form so everyone can really understand what's going on there. I think that there are ways that an anime for Kimetsu could actually, like, just be better than the manga and fix the issues that the manga has. I haven't seen the Kimetsu anime, so I can't really speak as to how it's done so far, but I know people seem to really like it, so, you know, maybe it does a really good job. But I do think that, like, that's what's interesting about Kimetsu for me right now, and that's why I'll probably watch the rest of the anime. You know, I'll probably watch Infinity Train, I'll probably watch, like, the last few seasons, because, like, now I'm legitimately curious, how could an anime, like, is the anime gonna actually try to improve on the manga? Because I think that's something that, like, it's very rare, you know, especially for me, right? Like, I'm the manga snob, right? Like, I'm the guy who sits here telling people that Hunter x Hunter 2011, it doesn't do a good job of adapting its source material. So, like, I'm the fucking manga elitist. So if I'm sitting here being like, wow, I see clear ways that anime could be better, I'm excited for that possibility to, like, sit here and be like, yeah, guys, the Kimetsu anime just does a better job with the material. You know, I wanted to say that because I think that that's really, really interesting. But I do want to move kind of to talk about the final arc, because I think that as it was coming out, there were a lot of people who maybe liked it before and had big issues with the final arc. And I personally do have some issues with the final arc, but I think that there's some things that I kind of don't mind as much. So one I want to talk about is, and I've heard this from a few different people I'm friends with, that they don't like the way the fights are structured. They don't like the structure of them. They don't like that every demon gets their backstory in the fight. But I want to explain why that is. And so I'm going to start, and I'm going to read 2 pages from Kimetsu. That I tweeted them out, but I basically said that, you know, these 2 pages were Kimetsu in a nutshell. So I want to read them because I think that, like, there's interesting stuff going on there that I think is kind of pertinent to what Kimetsu is about and why the stories why everything has to be structured the way it is. So Giyu tells Tanjiro, I mean, the page is on screen, right? It's, don't waste pity on a demon that ate dozens of people, even if it looks like a child. It was a horrible monster that lived for hundreds of years. And then Tanjiro responds, in order to soothe the spirits of those it killed and to make sure it claims no further victims, I will swing my blade and lop off the head of any demon without mercy. But I will not belittle those who regret their actions and suffer over the things they did as demons. Because demons were once human, because they were human like me. Move your foot. They aren't ugly, worthless monsters. They are pitiful creatures, once living and now empty shells. So Kimetsu makes it very clear, right, that part of being human is dying, right? And that, you know, you have to accept your death as a human, and that, you know, these demons are trying to, for whatever reason, right? They're chasing whatever they're chasing, right? For example, what's his name? Aka, the guy who killed the flame pillar, right? I'll put his name on screen. He was fighting Tanjiro and Giyu, and he, you know, he just wanted to be strong, and that was the whole thing, was about strength. And then we see his backstory and why he was so obsessed with this thing he was chasing that he felt like he had to reject his humanity to achieve it. And that's why the demons don't die, right? Because by rejecting their humanity, they become less human. And I think that what's interesting about that is that for all the demons to die, they become more human. And they, you know, a lot of them do regret the things they did. It's even mentioned a couple demons regret killing people, you know? And it's that they regret what they did, and that's what leads them to kind of, you know, it's through regretting their actions as demons and through remembering what it's like to be human that they achieve their humanity and can accept their death, and that's when they die, right? And that's why you have to have the flashbacks at the end of the fights, because they don't remember their time as human, and it's once they remember their time as humans, they regain their humanity, and that's when they die, because once they become human again, they should no longer be a demon, and they should no longer be chasing death, and it's time for them all to die. So by nature, the core of Kimetsu as a story causes these fights to be played out like this, right? That's just how the story has to work for the point it's trying to achieve. And I do think that Kimetsu actually does a good job of getting this point across. I think that, you know, you can look at, there are multiple times where, you know, Tanjiro says, I will never forgive you, Muzan. You know, I will kill you because you are the, like, not only is Muzan going against his own humanity, he's changing other people's humanities. And even in Muzan's final moments, he doesn't regret his actions as a demon, which is why Tanjiro doesn't forgive Muzan, because what he says specifically, right, is, that he will not belittle those who regret their actions and suffer over the things they did as demons. Muzan doesn't do either of those. He was still, in his final moments, trying to chase that perfect life form. He just realized that a perfect life form that can cheat death doesn't exist, and that's when he died. Because Muzan doesn't become human. He just realizes that no life form can escape death. He still doesn't think of himself on the same level as a human, which is why he turns into the big baby and why he tries to take over Tanjiro. Because, like, it's going to be trying to show that even to his dying moments, you know, he doesn't die gracefully like the other demons. He is trying to reject his humanity and reject death and become an ultimate life form throughout it. And what he realizes is, it's not about, you know, humans die, I'm a human. It's everything dies, I'm living, I have to die, right? Which I think is an interesting parallel because, you know, you have these other demons who turn human and die. Muzan doesn't turn human and die. And that's why the fight gets drawn out, because the fight was drawn out. Muzan was drawing out this fight to try to preserve his humanity. And so I think that, like, again, that's, like, what's interesting about Kimetsu is that everything is there, right? Like, everything the manga is trying to explain to people is there. And I bet that a lot of the other issues people have will be in the, you know, like, for example, right? Like, people complained about the final chapter, right? Because it jumped forward, which I'll talk about the final chapter in a second. Although I do have, I'll only briefly touch on it because I do have an entire chapter review for the final chapter on my channel. So you can go watch that if you want my more in-depth thoughts. But for example, people complained about the final chapter because, oh, we didn't get to see our characters, like, through the end of their lives. I'm sure there will be a volume, Omake chapter that explains everything and shows us what happened to them and shows, like, the tree of, hereditary, how things played out. And that's the whole thing, and that's my whole issue with Kimetsu, is that I think everything is there. I just don't think it's delivered well enough to the readers for them to accurately be able to interpret it all without reading it twice or paying, like, really close attention to these small things that are going on. That's my core issue with this series, and it makes me so upset because I think that, like, there are other problems too, right? That you can even tie back through some, backwards logic to that. Like, okay, for example, I think that, a big issue that people have with a lot of the pillars, especially towards, the end, I think it was like chapter 200, 201, when they all died, right? Is that you didn't have enough time to really, grow closer to them, right? I think the problem with that is there was an entire training arc where Tanjiro spent time with all the pillars. Imagine if that arc had been 50 chapters, right? And it goes way more in depth into Tanjiro training with all the pillars. Not only would his relationship deepen with the pillars, but your relationship as a reader deepens with them. You understand who they are, what they're going for. It probably could have shown more of the Love Pillar and Snake Pillar and their romance. You could have shown more of the blind, the Stone Pillar and what was going on with him. And you would have had this deeper understanding of their characters. So I think that the final chapter and it's showing them all, their reincarnations, living in a happy life now that the demons are gone, which is their whole struggle the entire series, would be a more satisfying payoff. And so I think that that's another example of a place, like, if that arc had been extended by a large period, I think that people would have had way more connections to a lot more of these characters. And I think that would have only strengthened the things that happen as it goes on. And I think that, a lot of the current manga and Jump seem to have really fast pacing, right? You look at MHA, that bitch is blazing. Like, there is so much that's happened in, like, 250 chapters of that manga? It is gross. And then you look at, like, One Piece, like, in 250 chapters, we're like, what, in Skypiea? Like, not that, one is better than the other, but I think that that's kind of the trade-off when you have these, faster-paced manga that kind of like to get through their stories and have a lot happen by volume 20, and then, Kimetsu ends in, volume 23, I think is the last volume? That's so much faster, and so there's not as much time to build a relationship with these characters in this world. And so I do think that there's a good point to be made, because, I think everybody who reads the story connects with the main characters, right? With Tanjiro, Zenitsu, Inosuke, and Nezuko. But I think that they could have connected with the pillars in a similar way to the captains from Bleach, right? I actually see them really similarly. And with the captains in Bleach, right, there's so much, right? They all get fights in multiple arcs. There's Turn Back the Pendulum. There's a lot of time in the Soul Society just focused on them, where we see them and we see what they're about. And, in Bleach, where people kind of find out who they are and deal with their issues through fighting and through conflict, now we understand more about them just seeing them fight. And I think Kimetsu doesn't do that. And it's why, there are people who say that they like the slice of life scenes in Kimetsu more, because I think that the fights do more to service the demons than to service the characters. I think Tanjiro as a person doesn't grow much throughout the course of the series, but that's fine, because his philosophy early on is the philosophy the series wants to uphold and the themes that the series puts on you. So there's no way for him to grow from how he starts, right? He's not someone who starts hating the demons and wants to killing them all and learns to pity them and understand the ways they're human, because from the start he can tell that, right? And I think that there's no problem with having a character like that who is what the series is, right? And who only gains, like, strength but doesn't necessarily gain a lot of emotional maturity throughout the series, because he does grow as a character and there are things about him that change, but he very much is largely a similar person at the end to how he was at the beginning. The slice of life scenes do more in service of the characters, and we see more of these character interactions, and we see them kind of come together, and that's when people start to like them. And so there's an entire arc that could have been just a long slice of life training arc where we see more about these characters, we go more in depth into their backstories, and maybe, and this is what it was trying to do, right? And I think it does this to some extent, but it could have done it more, where we see, the pillars' hang-ups and why they're fighting and what's going on with them and what they're chasing, right? What their happiness that they're looking for is, right? Which is, but what's keeping them from being different than demons? Because I think what's interesting is the demons were stopped by other humans, and that's why they felt like they had to reject their humanity and become a demon. But the humans, everything that they wanted was stopped by the demons, right? The demons are the one actively hurting and keeping them from finding their happiness. And that's the same with a lot of other people that you just meet in Kimetsu, right? The demons are constantly, affecting other people's happiness. And I think the series even says at one point, just like, a world in which demons don't live is like would be a happier place, which is why the final chapter is these reincarnations of everyone. And you see like the two brothers are together, Love Pillar and Snake Pillar run a ramen shop together and are happy, Stone Pillar works with children, like it goes out of its way to show you, that all these people now are much happier, and the reincarnations of them are able to find the happiness that they lost because they live in a world without demons, which I think is like super good, and it's like the best way for the series to end, because that was something that characters have been saying the whole time. And again, like, I think that, I didn't feel anything when I saw Stone Pillar, with kids, but I recognized like, oh, that's what he wanted. That's all he wanted. Now his reincarnation can live happily in the life that he always wanted. But I think that there's a chance there to hit people emotionally if, again, the training arc has been extended and done a better job of expressing these ideas to the readers. That being said, I think that's most of the negatives I have for Kimetsu. I want to move now, I guess, to more positive things about the manga. I'd like to end this on a positive note because I've been kind of reaming the manga for, 20 minutes now, and I do want to talk more positively about it because I do think that there are good positives in Kimetsu. So, for example, I think one positive that I've heard some people complain about, but I really like, is the art. And I specifically want to talk about one aspect of the art that I think is, like, really interesting. So, like, outside of color spreads, which, you have to do a color spread, right? Jump comes to you and they're like, hey, you get a color spread this week, make a color spread. Kimetsu didn't have its first, like, full-page, just black and white normal manga spread until the Infinity Train arc. Like, that's kind of wild, right? Like, you look at these manga coming out now, they're getting their spreads, like, they're starting spread in chapter 1, spread in chapter 2, spread in chapter 3, and Kimetsu, like, held off on that. And I do think that went away as it started to go, and it did get more and more spreads as the manga went on. But I thought it was so interesting that Gotoge decided to hold using a spread, and used a lot of single page panels, right? Where, like, one entire page was a panel, and that was kind of Gotoge's spreads until, a quarter or a third of the way into the manga, which is so cool because you never, like, I was realizing as I was reading, I was like, wow, there hasn't been a spread, and I think part of that was because I was reading it on the Viz app on my phone where, it shows spreads as 2 images, so you have to turn your phone to really, see a spread, and I was like, I'm not turning my phone at all, like, I haven't had to do this once. And that was so weird to me because, I'm just used to constantly seeing spreads in manga. It was really cool. And I think, like, even just Gotoge's art style is, I think, really different from a lot of the other things. And I think that, the art of Kimetsu is very unique. And so I understand how some people don't like it. I, for one, am fucking here for it. I think the battles do a really good job of, showing you the flow and the layout of the battles. I think that the little chibi characters that people get for jokes a lot of the time is, especially Tanjiro's, like, idiot face he gets, is fucking hilarious. I love it. And I think that, even just the comedy was pretty funny. I think there were a lot of times that it used, like, Tanjiro is just a good boy joke in really fun ways that, like, were actually super fun, and I really liked him. I think Inosuke is a fucking joy. Like, I love Inosuke to fucking death. Like, that man is so funny constantly, and he's always on screen doing some stupid bullshit, and I love it. And he's actually great, and has, like, a good fight, and is a good character, at the same time as being, like, just this comedic relief, like, fucking retard. I think Zenitsu's pretty good, and I really like Zenitsu's fight. And I like that Zenitsu's fight in the final arc is pretty short. He comes, he does his job, and he gets out. Because that's the whole point, right? It's great. I think Nezuko's really good, and I love the way that Kimetsu uses Nezuko as a way to connect with the reader with certain things. For example, the way she talks. And when she finally is able to talk, and then when she's able to talk as it goes. Because, other demons can talk, but Nezuko doesn't talk till after the Sword Village arc. And even then, she doesn't even really have a good grasp over words, which is interesting because now she's this, she's a character who's even further from humanity, right? She can't even communicate with people. she literally wears a muzzle because they're worried she's going to eat people. And I think that that's such a great way to really show that Nezuko's starting to become human again. She's kind of able to talk, but not really. And then when she finally regains her humanity, one of the first things we see is she's talking her ass off to Tanjiro. And you get like these sibling interactions that you literally haven't seen the entire manga, but they feel good and earned. And like, even when I was reading weekly before I binged it, that was like one of my favorite moments of that, penultimate chapter, was seeing Nezuko kind of interact and be like a person again. Because, you spend all this time with this character who is nothing, and then once she becomes something, even though it's only for a chapter, you're like, that's how she acted as a demon, just she didn't talk. And you buy it, and it works, and it's really good. And she's even like Tanjiro in some aspects, which makes sense. It was great. I actually really liked their relationship. I actually really liked that penultimate chapter, just as a quick aside. I loved that, you see the main four go off and be on their own. I thought that was really good. I think that, before the final arc, not many people had issues with Kimetsu, because I do think that up until the final arc, the manga was pretty good. It did its job. I think that there wasn't a lot, like, there were stuff that wasn't explained as well, but I think that it made enough stuff clear that it wasn't an issue. I think that the one thing it did do that people maybe didn't realize is that, when you're having these arcs where there's one fight an arc, people don't really realize, what it's doing with the backstories for demons. So it's only once you get, 6 fights in an arc and they're like, okay, backstory, demon dies. Backstory, demon dies. Backstory, demon dies. This is kind of boring. Because the rest of the manga, even though it was doing it the whole time, when it's more spread out and we're not getting as many fights in a short, area, and it's one fight every, 50 chapters, not 50 chapters, probably like 25 chapters, but whatever. I think that's when people really start to recognize what's going on. And I'm not going to blame people who think that the fact that it's a similar, the fact that the structure is very similar to a lot of the fights is boring, but I do think that there's a legitimate story reason you can look at for why it's happening, and it makes sense within the context of what is Gotege going for thematically with Kimetsu no Yaiba. And again, I think a lot of the arcs early on, I don't think it really starts to get good until the Mountain Family arc, but then, you have the Mountain Family, you have Infinity Train, then you have the Red Light District, and then the Swordsmith Village, all of which are fucking great. And it's like this great stretch of the manga where I think everyone was super happy with it. It was doing its job great. Everyone was liking it. And then the final arc happened. And I get why people don't like the final arc. I really do. And I think that, people like to, and I've done this in the past as well, I think people like to blame weekly reading as a cop-out because, it's easy to say, oh, well, I didn't read it weekly, so I have a better understanding of the manga. But that's kind of a cop-out, because weekly reading matters too, and it's a mangaka's job to make something entertaining for both. I do think that, nowadays if we talk about Kimetsu, and if I'm going to recommend it to someone, the experience of binging it is probably better than the experience of weekly reading, because nobody's going to ever sit down to read Kimetsu no Yaiba and be like, alright, I'm going to spend the next 5 years of my life, this completed manga that everyone can see, I'm gonna read one chapter a week. Like, no, you're just gonna fucking binge it, right? Like every other sane, reasonable person is gonna do when they're sitting there looking at a 23-volume completed manga. But I do think there is, people who didn't like it and were reading it weekly, their, experience is still valid. I think we should look at why did people not like reading it weekly, and why is it probably a better experience if you binge it. Right? I think there are probably other manga that are, better weekly, If something's super episodic and it's kind of a gag. For example, Detective Conan, right? I would 100% bet, even if we just talk about weekly watching with the anime, that watching Conan, an episode a day or an episode a week, is a better experience than sitting down and watching 100 episodes of Conan in a week, right? You would die. Because that's so episodic and so formulaic that it's probably better in a certain format. In the same way, I think a story like Kimetsu that very much runs into itself and kind of does have a lot of small details that you can forget about over the course of 2 years. Of course, people are going to forget about that shit. And of course, people aren't going to like it as much when it's way easier to forget these tiny details that you learned a year ago that are kind of like a linchpin of the entire fight. You know what I mean? Do you see how, that's kind of an issue? And so I think that, again, while I think that blaming weekly reading for a serious public perception is small-brained, and I think it's reductive, and it doesn't actually, aim at the core issue, I do think that you can take a point and be like, okay, this was the problem that people had. Why did people who read it weekly have this issue? Why did I have it when reading weekly? But why, when I read it all in, a couple sittings, did I not have the issue? So, I think that's kind of the whole thing with Kimetsu. And that it's interesting that the final arc is what got the brunt of it all, when I think that Kimetsu was doing largely the same things its entire time. I just think some of the smaller things didn't matter as much until that final arc. So I want to, for the end of this review, I want to talk about Tanjiro, because this is something I say a lot, and I really do mean it. I think that, when we talk about these shonen battle series specifically, and I think you can make an argument that it's true for everything, but I think specifically for shonen battle series, your main character is the linchpin of your entire story, right? You look at One Piece. Luffy is great, stands for what One Piece stands for. You look at Naruto. Naruto is great, stands for what Naruto stands for. You look at Bleach. Ichigo is great, stands for what Bleach stands for. You look at My Hero Academia. Deku, guess fucking what, guys? He's great and stands for what MHA stands for, right? So these main characters, and there are different types, right? Ichigo is someone who, kind of has it. He's kind of there at the start of Bleach, but he doesn't really get there till the end. You look at Naruto, right? He starts as a character who, early on, he kind of wants to be the Hokage because he wants people to recognize him and respect him, but he doesn't really, he's not a character who's there yet, right? Like, he's not, into series Naruto. He hasn't had that growth and that change that happens throughout the course of the series. I think even Luffy has grown and changed dramatically throughout the course of One Piece. Tanjiro's a little bit different, because I don't think Tanjiro grows as much as a character throughout the series. I do think that Tanjiro is fine. I like Tanjiro. I think that, again, like, he stands for what Kimetsu stands for, and Kimetsu is a very black and white manga, right? Like, demons are bad because they aren't human. They become human, they are good, right? Or not good, but they're pitiable. It's not, Kimetsu doesn't really live its life in these shades of gray, right? It's very much a black and white, this is good, this is bad, right? And so, like, I don't think that it's necessarily, like, an issue that Tanjiro is I don't want to say a perfect character, but he's kind of perfect, right? He's obviously not strong and, like, shitting on everyone, but, in terms of his morals and his ideals, he kind of starts the story where he ends them largely. He changes a little bit, but I think that for the most part, Tanjiro is, like, the entire time, he is Kimetsu, like, I think that he's someone who, he stands for what Kimetsu stands for, and he pushes the ideals that the manga is pushing, while not really being too different and too out of the ordinary. And again, like, that's fine. You can have characters like that. There is a place in stories for main characters who don't change a lot, If you look at, like, most superhero movie, most, not all, right, because, like, there's obviously the origin story where they start as not a hero and end as a hero, but, like, there is, like, a place where, like, Superman, I don't want to say Superman, I haven't read that super, but, like, there's a point for some superheroes where, they can go through an entire, like, story arc or whatever, and, like, they don't really change much because they're already, like, they're standing for what you're supposed to believe in, And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I understand why people don't like that as much, or people may say Tanjiro is boring if you really like, good character arcs, which, I mean, I'm not saying that I don't, right? Like, a lot of my favorite series I love because of the character art, like the main character or a character I relate to's character arc. But, I think that there is a place for it, and I understand people have an issue with it, but I don't think it means Kimetsu's bad, and I don't think Tanjiro is a bad character. I think Tanjiro serves his purpose, and he is, kind of charismatic. Like, he's fun to watch. I already mentioned, I like the jokes where Tanjiro is just being a good boy. I think they're really fun. And so I don't have as much of an issue with Tanjiro as most people do. And, again, I think it's pretty telling that people who don't really like Tanjiro very much probably don't like Kimetsu very much. But the people who like Tanjiro and stan Tanjiro like Kimetsu. Because, again, the main character is the linchpin of a shonen. And so, I want to talk about Tanjiro because, like, I don't think he's that bad, right? Like, I think he really does his job and he does it well. He's not my favorite main character, He's not my favorite character in the series. I like Inosuke the most, But I think Tanjiro does a great job. He definitely, he is what the story needs him to be. And I think he does that job perfectly fine. So I don't have as much of an issue with Tanjiro. And I did want to mention him because I do see him thrown around a lot as, like, he's the issue with Kimetsu, and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that's I think those are most of my points I had for the manga. Maybe I'll talk more about specific things in more detail at a later date. You know, if someone wants to see me talk just about the final arc, maybe I'll do an entire video on the final arc and really dive deep into a lot of the fights and what's going on. But, you know, for just an overview of the manga, I think it's good. Like, I would give the manga like a 7 out of 10, I think. I don't think it does anything, like, I think it does some things well, but it does a lot of things not so well. And I think that for every moment that, like, hits it out of the park, there are moments that miss the mark. And so, you know, it's fine. I don't hate Kimetsu, but I wouldn't say I love it. I would say that, like, you know, maybe if you've seen the anime and you were thinking about watching it and you liked it, yeah, go for it. If you've seen the anime and you're like, well, I really like the anime, I don't normally read manga, this is the one fucking time you'll hear me tell you, just keep watching the anime for now. Because we don't know how it could turn out. If it's the better way to experience Kimetsu, I'll just tell everyone to watch it, you know? So, you know, I would say maybe wait on it. If you're watching it and you just want to keep watching it, maybe wait on the anime before reading it. But if you have no experience and you'd rather just read the manga right now, yeah, go for it. I think as long as you keep certain things in mind throughout, and as long as you, like, remember some of the details, or I think if you read it in a short enough time frame that it's easier to put everything together, I don't think you'll have a lot of the issues people did. But that's kind of where I stand on Kimetsu. So that's probably where I'm going to end this video. Thank you guys for watching all the way through. If you want to hear me talk more about Kimetsu, well, not Kimetsu anymore, but other Shonen Jump manga every week, I do weekly chapter reviews, so you can subscribe for those. I also do streams of them on Twitch, twitch.tv/VindyVondo. I've also started doing a lot of just chatting streams where I'm just kind of hanging out, maybe watching YouTube videos, doing tier lists, things like that. So you can go over to Twitch for those. You can follow me on Twitter for any updates. I'll tweet whenever I have videos in the works. Maybe I'll do polls for videos, you know, if I'm streaming, anything like that. And then I do a podcast with What the What in Craft Store, so we have the Weeb Club. And so you can go over to the Weeb Club, which I'll have all these links in the description, so you can go there and find that. That being said, though, I appreciate you guys sticking around this long. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.